Podium Audio presents A Deadly Affair, Book 1 of Angus Brodie and Michaela Forsyth Murder Mysteries. Written by Carla Simpson. Performed by Bronwen Price. Prologue. Whitechapel, London, 10th of January 1889. Her eyes were wide open, lips parted as if she would have said something, or perhaps smiled one last time. She was young compared to the others, pretty, with her dark hair fanned out about her. But there were no words, not even a startled scream. There was only the cruel mockery of the gaping wound at her throat, the macabre smile the killer had given her, as a pale hand moved slowly through the water, as if waving farewell. Chapter 1. The Morgue, Bow Street Police Station, London. "Are you quite certain that you're up to this?" I gently asked my housekeeper. "I will do this if you cannot." Not that I was in the habit of identifying dead bodies. My housekeeper, Alice, had been with my family since my sister and I were small children, after my first experience with viewing dead bodies. She was, in fact, like family. We had lost our mother first to consumption, then our father a year later. Not from some illness, but from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Only later we learned that his decision to take his own life was due to losses that included the only home we had ever known and what little remained of the Forsyth estate. It was sold off to pay our father's gambling debts. A dark shadow for two young children to live with, save for a small inheritance from our maternal grandfather and the somewhat eccentric kindness of our great-aunt, Lady Antonia Montgomery. Aunt Antonia had never wed, though not for lack of suitors, but for lack of any man who could possibly keep up with her rather adventuresome spirit. Nor had she any experience with children. That, however, did not prevent her from taking on two orphan children, ages 6 and 8 years at the time. She saw it as another great adventure, without the usual inconvenience of childbearing, as she later explained it. In the two of us, she had a ready-made family that suited her somewhat unconventional maternal instincts quite well. It was quite a challenge for her. No two children could have been more different than Linny and me, as we were often reminded. "Linny is so feminine and delicate, while Michaela looks as if she might have sprouted in a hedgerow," our governess once commented, no doubt due to my rather unruly dark hair and equally unruly nature. She was promptly dismissed. One might have opinions, but as far as our aunt was concerned, one should keep them to oneself or risk her wrath. That observation, however, was not entirely unwarranted. I would much rather have spent a day adventuring about the rough and wild countryside of our aunt's estate in the wilds of Scotland, rather than at lessons I found to be tedious and incredibly boring. Perhaps it was that earlier experience of viewing dead bodies that had imbued me with a more pragmatic view and the habit of questioning everything about me. I had been the first to find our father in the stables, with a good portion of his head missing, blood soaking the hay where he had fallen. I had not been frightened by it, merely curious, the way children can be in finding something they have no experience with or understanding of. I simply chose to close off the traumatic experience, our aunt's physician called it, with a detachment that prevented me from becoming hysterical or mentally undone. Linny was far different, and had not seen death up close, and had no understanding of it. She was quiet by nature, even shy, while I much preferred climbing trees, and successfully, most of the time, walking on rocks across a stream, or wielding a make-believe sword while she read Chaucer or Shakespeare, or painted her pictures. "Michaela Forsyth, wild gypsy," Aunt Antonia called me, with a knowing smile, after she brought us to live with her. For it was nothing for me to bring home some poor creature that I'd found in the forest of her country estate, with the hope of making it a pet. Whatever shall become of you? She pretended to lecture me on the proprieties of a young lady who did not go about exploring in the forest and return with a torn dress and mud-spattered shoes, or no shoes at all. As childhood passed, we attended the finest finishing school with art and music lessons, which I considered to be dull and quite boring, while Linny excelled in both. Now Lady Lytton, my sister, had made a brilliant marriage. For my part, I had been pushing the boundaries of propriety and had set off on a series of adventures across Europe to the Far East, writing about those adventures with my character, Emma Fortescue, to surprising success. Now the world had been turned upside down once more. Linny had been missing these past several days, along with her maid, Mary, who was Alice's daughter. In all that time, there had been no word from her. She had simply vanished. Then, just this morning, we received word from her husband, Sir Charles Lytton, that a young woman's body had been found, pulled from the river, in a part of the city where no respectable girl or woman would dare to go. The first information received from him had mentioned a brief description provided by Chief Inspector Aberline of the Metropolitan Police. It described the young woman, approximately 20 years of age, with dark hair, and wearing the clothes of a servant. My initial relief that it couldn't possibly be Linny was replaced by the very real possibility that the young woman was known to us. Aunt Antonia had provided her private coach, along with Mr. Munro, who managed her household. Together, we made the trip across London to the Bow Street police station. Now, Alice tearfully nodded, a handkerchief clutched in her hand. She suddenly seemed very old and very small, as if she might disappear inside herself at any moment. She nodded and whispered, "I have to know." Mr. Munro stood with us, one at each side of her, he with that stoic Scot bearing, his crisp blue eyes hooded beneath the arch of dark brows. It struck me that we formed quite an odd group, the tall Scot, the diminutive Irish woman, and me, bound together by this horrible circumstance. I tightened my arm about Alice's shoulders, then nodded for the police surgeon to continue. "Water usually has an adverse effect on body tissue," he explained. "However, we're most fortunate that the Thames is quite cold this time of year. The body is well preserved, and there has been very little deterioration." Deterioration? As if the man was describing fruit or fresh cod at the market. And as for his observation that the situation was most fortunate, that raised the question as to what could have possibly been unfortunate. It was a ridiculous choice of words, with little thought for the poor woman who stood beside me. The surgeon looked up then, his expression what could only be described as curious, with an amount of excitement. He obviously performed these tasks far too often, given the crime that ravaged the East End, and with the recent murders of other young women. I suppose one developed a certain detachment for such things. However, I saw no reason for such detached analysis. "If you please," I made no attempt to disguise my irritation. Beside me, Alice softly moaned behind the handkerchief and swayed unsteadily. I feared that she might go down. The surgeon, who greatly resembled Ichabod Crane, with his gaunt features and dishevelled hair, cleared his throat, as if he had merely been interrupted from some dissertation before a gallery of medical students. "Do continue, Dr. Bond." Chief Inspector Aberline, who was also present, instructed him. He stood apart, his expression unreadable, as the good doctor pulled back the sheet that had been draped over the examination table. It was done with great ceremony, much like a magician drawing back a curtain to reveal that the person behind the curtain had disappeared. Except that poor Mary Ryan still lay there, her lips tinged blue, with an assortment of bruises that had turned blue as well, and the gaping wound at her throat. "My sweet